Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sustaining Sustainability. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya, Professor and Director of the Center for Sustainable Business at the University of Pittsburgh. This week, I'm joined by Vipin Sondhi, Managing Director and CEO of Ashok Leyland Limited, based out of Tamil Nadu, India. Ashok Leyland, flagship of the Hinduja Group, is the second largest manufacturer of commercial vehicles in India, the third largest manufacturer of buses in the world, and the 10th largest manufacturer of trucks. We've invited Vipin to join us this week to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Indian economy, how the automotive industry is responding, and how a major automobile company can play a role in creating a sustainable future. In the interest of full disclosure, Vipin and I have known one another for a long time, as we did our MBAs together way back when at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Vipin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. And of course, good day to all the viewers. And Professor Bhattacharya, thank you very much for inviting me.
So, Vipin, we're talking to people from around the world, and recently, India has seen a sharp rise in COVID-19 cases. Can you give us a sense of what the situation is like in Tamil Nadu or Delhi, basically any areas you're familiar with in India as a result of the global pandemic?
Yes, it's an interesting question. I think if I were to take you back to March, I think what the government of the day in India and the Prime Minister in particular, it was important to get a balance between lives and livelihoods and the right balance. And there's never any easy answer to that. It was very clear that lives mattered first, and perhaps India took one of the most significant countrywide lockdowns to contain the spread of a virus, starting about the 25th of March or so. It was initially planned to be 21 days, but it continued for almost 3 months. Now, this impacted economic activity, and at some stage, livelihoods then start impacting lives, and then it becomes a vicious circle. So there became then a gradual opening up of the country, state by state by state. We have a federally managed government, so each state has their own, let's say, first minister, and gradually each state started opening up. The impact on livelihoods of daily wage earners was tremendous. And there was no way that we could continue this for longer. And the biggest stimulus really is coming back to work. Now, we are a large and diverse country, as you know, Professor Bhattacharya, and different parts of the country are at different stages of the pandemic curve. The original high burden cities like Mumbai, Delhi, and even Chennai, the curve is largely plateauing or showing a declining trend. But now we are moving to the rural areas, we are moving to areas where the infection perhaps is going up and the health infrastructure is limited. I think we still have some time to go. And as economic activities come back and people start interacting with each other and testing starts going up, there is likelihood of an increase in the number of cases. What's important is, has the health infrastructure, which was limited, is it coping up to ensure that people do not suffer for any length of time? It's a situation that we are watching very, very closely as a country.
So India's GDP contracted like 23.9% in the April to June quarter due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And, for fiscal year 21, GDP growth is forecasted to contract 8% to almost 12%, despite what's the reopening efforts going on now. How is this impacting business in India and more importantly, the vulnerable populations, how economically vulnerable populations, how are they dealing with the situation?
There was a huge movement of labor from places where they were working to back home, which could have been 300, 400, 500 miles away, and that had not been provided for because the nationwide clampdown was immediate. So, to the credit of the government, as they saw the migrant labor which hadn't been accounted for in that sense returning back to their villages because that's where they probably felt more secure. The government had, over the last few years, created bank accounts of virtually everybody where it could transfer money, if required, directly into the bank accounts of the vulnerable. But the important thing is, how does one create jobs and how do we bring back labor to where they were working earlier so that they feel secure and they feel safe? But one thing, CB, I must tell you, there was a message from the government that we need ventilators. The country needs ventilators. We don't have enough. So we asked our young people, we make trucks, but would you like to make a ventilator? And they quarantined themselves in the R&D department for, I think, for about 3 weeks. And what they came up with, what later has become to be known as an automated respiratory assist device. And they did it because they wanted to do it. What has then happened was then we got in touch with smaller companies that were actually making ventilators and being, large scale suppliers. We helped them ramp up their supply chain so that ventilators could reach out. And this was all done during the lockdown period because people wanted to do it. And I think that really is what you deal with a lot on sustainability. That when you're given a higher purpose, you want to do something, people do it with a great amount of enthusiasm and a great amount of pride.
So, how has your business been impacted as a result of this pandemic?
CB, for all practical purposes, April, May, and June sales were, well, zero, I'd say virtually zero. I think the focus at that point in time was to ensure, as I mentioned, communication and morale, not only within the company, but outside the company with the entire ecosystem and the supply chain partners, etc. I think what one of the things that happened was that since the lockdown happened suddenly, drivers of trucks got stranded wherever they were in the country. And I think we reached out, our people reached out to try and give them food, to some extent shelter, to try and get them back. All our factories opened up their kitchens to ensure that food to paramedics, to government officers who were braving it out was provided. So the factory kitchens were working. Now, as we came back, perhaps sometime in the latter part of June, as we started opening up, we found that while most of our labor was around our plants, being a company that's been around for over 72 years, that wasn't necessarily true of the supply chains. And the supply chains are so interconnected and so intertwined, including global supply chains, that that became a challenge. So if one part was short, a nut, a bolt, or anything like that, you can't produce the vehicle. Also, containment zones were moving from place to place depending on how the pandemic was moving to these zones. So it was important that we had immense coordination and navigated our way. And to this day, those challenges are continuing. So the first quarter was a washout. But I'm optimistic about the future. I think what we are seeing now is certain segments of the commercial vehicle industry already coming back to pre-pandemic levels. Not all segments, but certain segments. And the reasons are very interesting. Now you see that e-commerce has become extremely important, even more important than it was pre-pandemic because people want things at home. So light commercial vehicles are required for that. Infrastructure continues to make progress. So our tippers are gaining as well. So different segments, different growth rates.
Ashok Leland's philosophy is "Aapki jeet, hamari jeet," which means your victory, our victory. So tell us more about what this means to you and how this aligns with the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit for all stakeholders.
Yeah, you said it very well. And the victory has to be for the people, the victory has to be for the planet. About a year ago, we unveiled a new vision for our company, which then said that we must move outside the shores of our country to be a global top 10 commercial vehicle player. But each of the other words was carefully crafted, which means we had to create reliable and differentiated products, but not physical products alone. solutions as well, while delivering outstanding stakeholder values. Now, all of this cannot come unless we ensure that we have a relationship with people, and people not within the plant, people across the cross section, that we are environmentally responsible. So we are doing a few things. I think our mission statement is enriching lives through mobility. Now, mobility means a deeper sense of purpose and how are we relating to the environment. So, I'm happy to talk about the steps that are being taken on how we are working through to enriching lives through mobility.
So, could you provide some examples of how Ashok Leyland is pioneering sustainability in auto manufacturing?
I think it would be fair to say that on the environment front, all wherever we come across, which is our facilities, our factories, we are focused on implementing energy, waste, and emission reducing initiatives. It is extremely important that we discuss this with our supply chain and with our dealers as well, so that as much as we can influence, we try and influence whoever we work with on the front of the environment. On the social front, while we have what is called corporate social responsibility, but I think the initiative that we have is called Road to School. The objective of this is to improve the quality of education in government schools, which don't have, let's say, the opportunity of infrastructure like CB, you and I have had the opportunity during our education. They are in remote rural areas, but they are around our factories. And that journey started in 2015. We have about 710 schools today, about 55,000 children benefiting from this program. But I'd like to mention one thing that is done uniquely here. The government has a midday meal scheme for children coming to school from less privileged backgrounds. But if a child is to remain hungry till lunch, then what happens from the time the child enters school till lunch? So we provide breakfast as well and nutritious, because that is the first meal that the child has the opportunity to have. Of course, then it improves attendance, but very important, it also improves attentiveness. So we are conscious of the fact that increasingly there will be friction with society of big business, but it's very important to take, it's big business's responsibility to take the first steps to engage with society and ensure that we work in a seamless manner.
So, post COVID 19, how do you envision the automotive industry evolving to, build back better, to build back a more sustainable world?
To complement the government actually moved from the equivalent of Euro 3 to Euro 4, and then gave the automobile industry just 3 years, where normally it's 6 to 7 years in other parts of the world, to move to Euro 6 emissions. And that happened on the 1st of April 2020. That's earlier this year. Now, we are at par with anywhere in the world as far as this is concerned. The second part is that I think there's a lot of focus, and even to the extent of subsidy, in creating an ecosystem for electric mobility. And various states are participating in this. And we, Ashok Leyland, have our own electric mobility bus platform that's engaged in 2 cities. And as the ecosystem benefits, as the ecosystem actually develops, this is only going to grow, because people are demanding that they have a pollution free life to live in. Now, Euro 6 is actually clean diesel. So, Euro 6 combined with electric mobility will make our cities far more cleaner than they ever were before. Now, our Prime Minister made a clarion call for what is called Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is self reliant India. That doesn't mean that we disengage with the world, we engage with global supply chains, but make sure we engage in a manner that we make in India, but we make for the world. So we have to have technology that the world will support, while providing employment opportunities to people in the country, in the manufacturing area as well. I think what happens in America so well, and at least a few Germany as well, that the troika of industry, government, and academia has to work together. And too often we leave academia outside this. We've got to bring in professors and we've got to bring in students. They will be the pioneers of innovation for the future. And if we can do that, and we are trying to do that as well for electric mobility, I think we will have a far more sustainable future.
So, Vipin, we are coming to the close of our time. What important message would you like to convey to companies during the COVID-19 era?
CB, I had the pleasure of reading your book, Small Actions, Big Difference. It was just over a year ago, if I remember correctly. And it's important that business take full ownership of delivering sustainable and equitable growth. And I think one of the things that came out of our conversations in the past is every employee has to take that ownership. Only then can the organization take ownership. And I think we are not there, but I think the drill down is that what does each employee think about it? And if motivated and shown the bigger picture, every employee will do that. The second is that the pandemic has changed the normal way of doing things. I don't think there'll ever be a normal. I think there'll be no normal, because the moment you have a normal, it gets disrupted. So it's important for us to be able to adapt continually and accept the fact that there will be change, and the change will come faster than it has ever come before.
Thank you so much, Vipin Sondhi. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, to make it more formal. But CB, thank you very much, and all good wishes to you.
And to you too. And this is your host, CB Bhattacharya, saying goodbye. And please join us next time for another edition of Sustaining Sustainability. And before I sign off, I do want to say that this podcast is made possible by the help of my colleagues, Leslie Marshall, who's the Associate Director of the Center for Sustainable Business, and Alyssa Martinek, who is the Sustainability Coordinator of the Center for Sustainable Business. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya. Bye-bye.